Welcome to Moving Conversations, a podcast for movement professionals by movement professionals. If you coach, train, or teach movement, Pilates, or fitness, then this podcast is for you. With more than 60 years of experience in fitness and Pilates, your hosts, Brian Ritchie and Nora St. John, explore the science of human movement, diving deep into the facts, myths, and common misconceptions, hoping to spark thought and conversation about how we view fitness and movement. Now, let's jump into Moving Conversations. And welcome back to Moving Conversations. I'm Brian Ritchie. Joining me as always is Nora St. John. Good morning, Nora. How are you today?
I'm very well. We've had some rain again. Apparently the snowpack, the Sierra snowpack has what they call the trifecta. So all of the water, or a good bit of the water in California is dependent on the Sierra snowpack. And this year we're like rocking. So that's always a good thing for us Californians. We're very drought sensitive because it gets very
nice.
dry.
Yeah. I had a friend who lived in the Sierra Nevadas, and he loved it when it would snow because he'd say, "Oh, we're going to be covered for water for the year." And I was like, it's hard to be that dependent on, Mother Nature for all of that.
Yes, it is.
Here in DC, we don't have to worry about that. We worry about other things, but we don't have to worry about that. So, yeah. All right. So, last couple of sessions, we talked about the foot, and I know we had talked about possibly doing an episode on exercise programming, but you and I both were like, well, we covered a lot of exercises already.
We did. Yes.
In especially the last two episodes when we did pathologies as well as overall, issues. So we thought, you know what? I think we covered a lot of that. We can come back to it in the future, mainly because we've been getting more people asking us about a specific topic, whether through email or even seeing us in person, that I thought, this wasn't a bad idea. When you brought it up, I said, yeah, I've been getting the emails. You've been getting it in person. So let's do it. And the topic is going to be today, osteoporosis. So yeah, we'll be covering that. But first, do us a favor, hit that like and subscribe button, and please comment as much as you can on our videos, as well as our audio. Hit the like and subscribe on, the platform of your choice. You can always reach us at movingcombos@gmail.com, Instagram @movingcombos. All right. So yeah, so it was very interesting sort of that we were sort of almost on the same wavelength. I was like, yeah, we have had people asking about this. So I think that that's a good opportunity for us.
I've had, for whatever reason, in the last 2 weeks, like 6 different people have brought this topic up for me. Different instructors and just questions they have and how do they deal with clients with it and all that. And it's also something where, particularly for Pilates, we don't have great answers. Pilates, as it's traditionally taught, is very flexion oriented. It's very biased towards loaded flexion, which is generally not considered a very good thing, a high fracture of risk for osteoporosis. So, and it's kind of like, okay, so just don't do this, which most clients who have it go, I'm completely asymptomatic. I feel nothing. Why can I not do things today that I could do yesterday? So a lot of issues come up around this. And we just thought, well, it's an opportunity for us to chat about it. And, we're going to bring up some controversies, I'm sure.
Well, that's the thing. When we talked about this,
We're diving in the mud here.
What we're going to do is this is going to be a conversation between two people who have worked a lot in this field. I've seen a lot of osteoporotic patients, a lot of osteopenic clients. Didn't mean patients, clients. You've seen a lot of clients with it as well. And so we're going to be talking from experience for one, but also sometimes it's good. And this is that fly on the wall sort of thing that when we first decided to do this podcast is Nora and I would get together and have hours and hours of long conversations on all these topics and just bring things up and say, have you ever thought of this? And what about this? So you guys, this is kind of what we're going to do today, is just talk about this, what we might do, what we might think, talk a little bit about, the, for lack of a better word, anatomy of it and what the pathology really is, but then dive in a little bit because there's so many of our clients that do have osteoporosis or osteopenia. And it's not always the clients that you think.
Absolutely. So again, this is going to be, there'll be some just basic introduction. There'll also be some questions, like
Mhm.
I just have a lot of questions, as does Brian, and certainly as do all of the instructors that I talk to. Like, well, what about this exercise, and what about that? So we'll get into some of the content. We'll just open up that door, and then it may be that we follow this up with maybe some answers to some of the questions if they come in the comments, or if we do more research and get answers to some of them. So, what is osteoporosis? We start with a definition. Brian, what is osteoporosis?
Basically, osteoporosis is the breaking down of bone.
Right.
Our bones have a recycling ability. There's a natural ebb and flow within our bones. There's constant breakdown and constant building up. And
Mm-hmm.
osteoporosis begins when there is not as much building up as there is breaking down. So we have that breakdown. And it's usually going to be of the trabecular portion of the bone. The trabeculi don't get that same density, whereas you kind of want that. I call it honeycomb, because when you look at a bone that's cut in half, when it's tightly packed, and I'm thinking specifically of the femoral head, when it's
Mm-hmm.
tightly packed, that person has great bone strength. Whereas when it looks a lot more sparse and the honeycomb is a little bit bigger and there aren't as many connections, that's when we're going to lose that strength, that internal strength, those internal arches and whatnot that give us the strength that it needs to support our weight. Because if you think about it, our bones, the only things preventing us from collapsing on the ground,
His
when
bones.
we stand up,
Yeah.
we got to.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's
So,
how I've always thought about osteoporosis is more breaking down than building up.
right. And so one of the analogies I use there is, if you think about a sponge, all right, you've probably all seen a kitchen sponge. And there are those sponges that are very fine grained, right, that don't have very
Mm.
big holes in them. And we've seen those here and there. Like, I think of a cosmetic sponge for you ladies out there. Those are generally pretty finely grained sponges. And that's kind of like how bone would be if it was pretty dense and pretty solid. Then you think about like your basic, colored cellulose kitchen sponge with big holes in it. That's more like the trabecular bone that is breaking
Yep.
down, that is not so densely interwoven. And again, it is like these arches. And one of the things that builds bone is stress. So when you put stress into the bones, that's what actually creates and the trabeculi, or the bony structure inside the bone, responds to what stress is put on it by putting down more bone during the building process of bone. So stress is what creates bone. Now, one other thing I'll say here is, and this was just slightly horrifying, we basically reach about maximum bone density in our 30s, by the time we're
Mhm.
30. A lot of things change at 30, like balance, bone density, all kinds of things. So, what you do as a young adult, as a teenager, and then as a young adult, have a profound impact on your bone density for the rest of your life.
Yes. That's the thing that I've seen a number of pieces of research on this, that the more active you are younger,
Mhm.
and what they're seeing now is a lot of my clients that I'm seeing in their 60s, 70s, 80s, mostly female. Usually when you talk about, well, what sports did you play? Sports?
Yeah,
What do
nothing.
you mean sports? You might have them have been a dancer, but it's rare. Usually it's
Yep.
we didn't do that in my school.
Right. Exactly. Women didn't do much physically.
No.
Hmm.
But what we're seeing is now that Generation X is sort of approaching that age group where osteoporosis is going to be a little bit more likely, or diagnosed a little bit more. My generation was the one where women were doing a little bit more activities, soccer, basketball. There was a lot more
Yeah.
playing, and it was
Yep.
expected of you.
Yep.
And what they're finding is at the teenage years is really the sort of the big area, the number one area, that how much stress you put on your bones in your teenage years really sets you up for the rest of your life.
Yep.
And that if you did play soccer, you did play basketball, you did a lot of jumping, you did a lot of that, you're much less likely to be diagnosed or to have thinning bones as we get older. And it sort of sets us up long term at that young an age, which I find fascinating.
Which is honestly great to know. I mean, any of
Oh,
you who
yeah.
have, teenagers or children, I'm sure many of you do out there, like, this is just something to know. Like, get them into some version of weight bearing exercise and have that be part of their lifestyle. I think about some relatives. I have a lot of different relatives with different versions of that. Some were like, don't ever move, just sit. And some were like, if you're not moving, you're not alive. So I've got both versions. And you see, I've watched them grow up. This is my nieces and nephews. I've watched them grow up with very different physicalities, because some of them were very, very active as children, and some were like not active at all as children. So that's just, something to think about in terms of prevention. One little caveat I want to throw out there, though, is because I've worked with a number of people in this circumstance, is if, on the other hand, you were active, but you're active in, let's say, dance, gymnastics, ice skating, rhythmic gymnastics as a woman, and you were also in a calorie deficit because you were chronically weirdly dieting, or nutritional issues were part of your thing, or eating disorders, then you end up, honestly, at a higher risk of osteoporosis. I've had a few clients who are in their 30s with osteoporosis, and it was basically because of eating disorders related to their activities when they were teenagers. So just to, it's not all good news. Make sure that there's also really good nutrition during those growing years, because that's what builds bones too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, that's something to really keep in mind, because one of the things that you're going to hear from a physician, if you're ever diagnosed with osteopenia or osteoporosis, is nutrition. They're going to bring that up, making sure that you're getting, enough, make sure that you're getting enough protein. There's so much that we still don't know about osteoporosis, but what we do know is that there are a few things that really do help, and proper nutrition is definitely one, as well as getting enough of that vitamin C or vitamin D and calcium combination. Yeah. And that's fairly new in my lifetime. I don't know about yours, but it used to just be calcium, calcium, calcium. Then suddenly it was, you have to have the vitamin C as well, or vitamin D as well.
And one of the things about vitamin D that's a little bit tricky, and I've had mine tested, and it tends to be on the low side most of the time, is, vitamin D comes from sunshine, from sun exposure. That's where we get our vitamin D from if we're not supplementing with it. And if you're like most people I know, you are either inside all day, or right, slathering, teaching, working, whatever, or you've got so much sunscreen on when you go outside that you don't actually get the benefits of sun exposure. So, and it's also, at least, again, a lot of debate on this, but one other thing I've read is that if you're basically kind of like Northern California and above in terms of latitude, or in terms of where we are on the planet, the sunshine, just, there isn't enough sunlight for you even to get good exposure, even if you're out in the sunlight. So that's just something too to be aware of, that if you're in a very northern clime, or even just a kind of northern, San Francisco isn't that far north. We're not Oregon, we're not Washington, we're not, Minnesota. It's hard to get enough sun exposure. So, vitamin D supplementation is something you might want to talk to your doctor about if you aren't already working on that.
And I've talked to a lot of physicians about this, and almost all of them, to a one, have said you need to be on vitamin D. Male, female, everybody does. We're spending much more time indoors. Remember, we're not out tending the fields. We're not outside all the time. We're indoors. We wear a lot of clothing. We have more sunscreen now than we ever did before. So listen, you've got to supplement that. And I've had a couple of them say that the RDA needs to change their recommendations, because they're finding people who are taking, the recommended daily are still testing very low.
Testing low, exactly.
So that's something to talk to your physician about, because that's important.
One other little piece of that, which is interesting, and we'll get into this in a minute, and complicated, is, vitamin D is very different in terms of how our skin takes in and processes sunlight, depending on the color of our skin.
Yeah.
The lighter skinned you are, the darker skinned you are. A lot of my friends of African descent, or African American friends, or Black friends, have really low vitamin D levels because they spend their time inside, and because their skin is not designed to, apparently, as efficiently transfer sunlight into vitamin D. Just they grew up in a different environment, or their genetics are from a different environment, I really should say. So it's also related to somewhat to your skin color. So those are just things to be aware of.
Yeah. Yeah. And the thing that I find most interesting is when we talk about prevention of osteoporosis is, yes, stay active when you're young. It's sort of that, like that old saying, you know, the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. Next best time is
Right.
now.
Right.
So guess what?
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
not 16 anymore. So we need to do something today to help that. And there's a lot of things we can do. And we're going to go into what the general things are. But the interesting thing that I've always found is that the person who looks the healthiest, which usually means lower body fat percentage,
Yep.
smaller,
Leaner. Yep.
leaner, they're much more susceptible to osteoporosis
Mhm.
because they're not carrying around a lot more weight and putting a lot more stress on their bones just from walking around. Uh, I remember I got into an accident on Amtrak where my foot got jammed in the gap between the train and the station. And when I went into the hospital, they took an x-ray and they literally said, "We've never seen bones this thick." They said, "You have an elephant's tibia. I don't know how you didn't shatter this bone." I was very heavy. I was over 400 pounds. So that kind of weight in my teenage years
Yeah.
helped my bones to actually grow very thick and strong. So the
Yeah.
amount of stress you do put on those bones really does transfer, you know,
Directly.
directly. But someone who was underweight, undersized for much of their life, just because that's their genetics. I have a number of clients who I refer to as petite. They're relatively small people.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And they're the ones that are coming to me in their 50s, in their 60s and saying, "Oh yeah, here's my DEXA scan. Oh my gosh, my doctor's really worried about this."
Yeah, so definitely body build. I mean, bones build by putting stress on them, and that stress can come from things. So in Brian's case, it can come from just putting weight on the body,
Yeah.
right? That's weight bearing exercise.
Yep.
You
Every
know,
step.
if you got 300 pounds versus 100 pounds, that's more weight bearing exercise into the skeleton just with gravity.
Yep.
And then, then looking at things like people who do more impact sports, runners, jumpers, basketball players, athletes who are pounding, like that's really useful. A couple things that I like to bring up here is people who swim. Swimming is not great for your bone density. It's not really great
Nope.
for fat loss either, just for other reasons. But just to know, like if you're going to take up swimming as an older person because it's better on your joints and all that kind of stuff, that's great. It's not going to necessarily be effective at helping bone density.
Yep.
And neither to some extent is bicycling.
Yep.
Right? Cycling has a little bit of a weight bearing component, but not really enough, in my understanding, to actually
No.
really create that force through the body. I mean, you think about it, right? You're moving like you're sitting on your butt basically, and you're
Mhm.
moving your legs. So you have some muscles that are pulling on the bones, but you really don't have a lot of that gravity force. So,
Yeah.
those are just some things to think about in terms of the activities people take up as they get older.
I've had to break this down for clients because they do bring this up to me that they want to start cycling or they want to, they come in and they get on the recumbent stepper or the recumbent bike or something. And I'll remind them, I'll say, "Look, think of it this way. Your bones are going to respond to how they're pulled against."
Right, right, right.
So
The
if I
forces
do
are
a
going
bicep,
through them.
yeah, if I do a bicep curl, for instance, the only part
Mhm.
of the bone that's actually going to grow is where the bicep attaches.
Uh-huh.
So
Right.
where that muscle attaches in the bone is pulling on that bone, so it's going to respond to the pull. Well, sitting on the bike, you're going to have some of that reaction. Whereas if I was on an elliptical machine, I'm more weight bearing. My weight is transferring down through my long bones, so it's going to
Right.
have some
Right.
additional stimulation. And
Yeah.
then on the treadmill, we're going to have even more because I'm going to have that pounding impact with each step. I'm going to have that
Exactly.
shock through the
Yep.
bones. So there's three
Yep.
different ways to think about it. Not just weight bearing, but also that shock through the long bones that can stimulate the walls of the bone, not just the trabeculi, but also the walls of the bone. And that's important.
Yeah. So thinking about that, right? Just being clear and just you can think about it, like what feels like it's got more force to you.
Yeah.
If I'm running, even versus walking versus jumping, like each of those, I feel the different force that goes through the body. Cycling, not much force. Swimming, no force.
None.
You're kind of an anti-gravity, right? Because the water is so buoyant. So that's the other thing is thinking about what kind of exercise you're doing. So there's the force through it. There's that, and there is some benefit from that muscular activation around the
Or
skeleton.
100%.
Right. So there is some benefit from that. A couple of things I want to say. One is, in the old days, actually still happening, I think now, astronauts on the International Space Station, if they're up there for too long, their calcaneus, their heel bone, would decalcify. And one of the biggest challenges with them coming back to Earth was being able to walk again, because they had to kind of like build that bone back up through weight bearing, right? Because you think about the International Space Station, they're floating around in space. There's not a lot of impact on the bones.
Yep.
So that's just like that's a little bit of like, oh, that's interesting that your heel, which is no longer pounding, just goes away. It's kind of, you don't need me, I'm going away. So that's just an example of how bones respond to stress or non-stress.
Yeah. I remember in college, I read a white paper by a NASA engineer that had talked about that was one of the biggest things that they were trying to create, was a treadmill or some sort of exercise device that would increase the amount of force on them so they could spend an hour or 2 hours or whatever it is. And they talked about centripetal motion. They talked about all these different things that could help increase force, because that's huge. If you're up there for prolonged periods of time, by the time you get back, you can't expect your body to hold you up, because you haven't produced enough stimulation. And with our clients, let's face it, most of the time, what do they spend their lives doing? Sitting
on their butt.
Yeah. So, their butt might be getting some weight bearing, but they're
not much else
going to get much.
No.
So yeah, we need to find ways that we can help to load that. And I got to say, in this instance, fitness comes out on top a lot more than Pilates does, primarily because we can do a lot of weight bearing stuff. And we've talked about that in episodes before, that's one thing that Pilates doesn't have nearly as much that we do, because we can do squats and step ups, and we can do small plyometric things, even for our older clients, that doesn't require much, but still gives that impact to the bones that can be very beneficial.
So I'm going to bring up controversy number one in a way, or one part of controversy number one, which is, and this gets a little bit to testing. Okay. So I'm going to bring this up. Take it as you like. One of the challenges with DEXA scans is they're known to be not 100% accurate. Okay. So they're kind of like, they're a rough idea. They're going to give you a rough idea. And one thing that I want to say is they generally test 3 places. They test the wrist, the spine, and the hip, right? The femur, right? Femur neck. And so one of the things that I like you to think about when you've got a client with osteoporosis or osteopenia is it's really useful to know where they've tested and what is actually osteoporotic or osteopenic and what isn't. So I've had clients where just their left hip is osteopenic. The rest of them are fine. Other clients where just their spine is, or just their wrist is. So that's useful to know. And again, if your client goes, I have no idea, my doctor just said I have osteoporosis, say, well, either have your doctor send me the report, or ask your doctor like where exactly it is. So that's one thing to think about. The other thing is, and this is being shown in a lot of research now, the osteopenia, osteoporosis line is not really well defined.
It's a spectrum. It's not a line.
It's a spectrum. It's not a line. And it's not like on this side you can do everything and on this side you can't.
Right.
So that's something to think about too, is it's like, I know, I listening to a podcast quite a while ago by somebody who was in the World Health Organization when they were figuring out the standards for osteoporosis. Like, okay, well, we do a DEXA scan. We kind of know what those numbers are. Where do we draw the lines on those numbers, right? So there's normal, which is kind of like normal bone mass for a 30-year-old. And then there's these standard deviations, above and below that. And that's how a DEXA scan works. So standard deviation means you are like one standard deviation above or below. If you're below that, that means you've lost, roughly a big chunk of your bone mass. And so what they did was basically like, okay, here's normal, here's osteoporosis. What do we call this space in between? And what she said was, it was a hot day in Geneva. We were all tired. We wanted to go home. So we just said, here, we'll draw halfway through. Because, you know, that at that point, that's the data they had. This was a fairly long time ago at that point, right? This was many, many moons ago.
Yep.
So thinking about that means that at this point, and this is a change for me, I take osteopenia more seriously than I used to. Right? I used to think, oh, osteopenia, okay, we're fine. I want to do prevention for you, but I'm not going to worry so much about limiting what you do. Now I'm a little more like, okay, let's think about that. Where are they on the like, are they just barely osteopenic, or are they kind of very close to osteoporosis? I'm going to look at those kind of things. And the last thing there's a lot of research that I was reading, because I've been just boning up on this a bit, which says that more people get fractures who are osteopenic than osteoporotic, which, okay, that sounds crazy, but you've got to look at, like, what are the other factors?
That's the thing.
One thing is, so if people are osteopenic, they're generally younger. And if they're younger, they might be more active, therefore more likely to fall, therefore more likely to get a fracture. A lot of people with osteoporosis aren't diagnosed until they're, 70, like they fall, they're in their 70s, they fall, and they break a wrist or they break an ankle or whatever they do. And oftentimes, like, they're already older, they're already less active, and there's less issues. So anyway, there's a lot of confounding factors there. That's just, something that seems to be statistically happening. So those are a bunch of things to throw out there.
I also wonder, depending on, there's a lot of different, depending on where you live in the US, in the world. I think a lot of osteopenia people haven't even been tested yet. People who might have it, because I know some people who don't start going in to see their doctor regularly for regular checkups and regular blood work or any of that until they're well into their 60s or 70s, because I feel fine. Why should I go to the doctor? It's not in their makeup.
Nope.
But
exactly.
I live in a fairly area of, affluence here. They go in every year. They're just, that's what they do, and certain people are sort of brought up that you take more preventative, measures. And so they're tested from the time they're in their 40s. So when they turn 50, they get diagnosed. So I think different cultures,
absolutely,
different demographics, people are going to be, some won't be diagnosed until they've
different access to healthcare.
Yeah. Until they've broken
all those
a hip
things
or whatever.
Absolutely. Yep.
So I think that's something else to think about.
I mean, I belong to Kaiser. I think you do too. And Kaiser tends to be pretty good on the preventive side, but they don't screen for osteoporosis.
Really?
They've never, no. I mean, I would think, I'm a 64-year-old woman. Like, at this point, somebody should have said you should get a baseline.
Yeah.
And they never have.
Interesting.
As far as I know, they don't do that preventatively, which is interesting.
Huh. Not being a middle-aged white woman, I wouldn't know. They haven't asked me yet about osteoporosis, but that's interesting. I would have assumed, because they do it for breast cancer, they do it for other things.
Yeah.
They want to make sure you're doing preventative. Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. I do wonder sometimes, and I see this more in diabetes, okay, with A1C and pre-diabetes. Every couple of years, and we see this with hypertension as well, the numbers change. Before it was here, and then it gets adjusted down, and then it gets adjusted up, and then it gets adjusted down. There's a lot of influence on what those numbers are. And I think the medical insurance industry is part of that, because if you're over a certain thing, then all of a sudden you need to start taking certain drugs. So some drug companies may be more likely to try and push for that. And yet the insurance industry may be pushing against that. So keep that in mind too, with osteoporosis and osteopenia, that number, if it goes over into osteoporosis, suddenly you need to take, the doctor needs to take it more seriously. And maybe there are different drugs, different things, different measures that need to be taken. And maybe someone doesn't want to pay for that. So there may be some influence there. So remember that line that they draw is very subjective. And I just look at the entire graph. I tell the client, bring it to me, and I look where they are on the graph. I want to see where they were last time, and I want to see where they are today. And I look at all three areas. And if I notice a trend that they're getting worse and worse, okay, I start taking it very seriously. If they've sort of plateaued out, then maybe I realize, okay, what we're doing seems to be helping. You know, maybe we can do a little bit more, but maybe that's going to be where they just are. That's okay too. But I don't take those numbers necessarily as, you know, the Bible. I don't think of it as
right
the,
now. At this
you know,
number, we're going to do this. Right.
right. So that's
Yeah.
just in my mindset, because I have a lot of clients who are osteopenia. And story that I tell in some of my classes, I had a client who was riding her bike 2 to 3 times a week, went rollerblading at least once a week, was one of the most active women that I knew. She was working regularly, all of this. I saw her on like Monday. I was going to see her again on Friday. She came in and she was walking really stiff, and she was just walking, and her stride had shortened, and she was walking, and she's mid-60s. And I'm watching, and I thought she hurt her back. My initial reaction was, oh, geez, you threw out your back. So when I said, what happened? She goes, nothing. I said, well, you're moving differently. Oh, my doctor told me I have osteoporosis. And I said, oh, okay. So I can't do anything. And I said, wow. And it was literally a death sentence to her, because suddenly she was like, I can't ride my bike anymore. I can't rollerblade. And I'm thinking, but you did that this weekend.
Yep.
So this is where I kind of wanted our conversation to also go, is what do we do with clients like this? Because look, yes, there are certain things we should avoid with some clients like that, but I also don't want to suddenly say your life is over. You're 62 years old. You've been diagnosed with something. Your life is now over. You're going to sit in a chair. Let me get the wheelchair out for you, because here's where you're going to be in a year. No, this is a woman who was dancing and having fun and full of life, Hispanic, Latina. She was full of fire. And all of a sudden, it's like someone extinguished it.
And not only that, but what is if she's got osteoporosis and she stops moving and doing what she's doing, does that improve her likelihood of having a fracture or decrease it? It's like it's terrible. Like if you give somebody that fear of being active, somebody especially like that who's been super active and is like doing everything they can. So there's that. I also want to bring up something again. This is part of this. Is so for women particularly, like women have this cliff. We talked a little bit about this with the menopause with Irene in one of our last sessions with McCormick, right? Women's hormones kind of fall off a cliff at a certain point in various different ways. Like they kind of go and then they kind of dive bomb. And it's that change in estrogen that often leads to a radical decrease in bone density.
Yep.
So for women who are perimenopause and then going through menopause and then kind of, at the end of whatever their symptomatic phase of menopause is, they can have a radical bone density change during that time. And one of the things that I sometimes think is like, okay, so maybe you've just come to a new normal, like that may be her new normal.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it may be problematic. It may be a risk of fracture. It may not. It may be just that's, her body's adaptation to it. And this brings up the next thing I wanted to talk about was if you are maintaining the muscular support for those structures, strong hips, strong spine, strong upper body, right? Just strength, basically muscular strength and support. Does that seem somewhat protective?
Mm-hmm. I was just going to ask you about that.
Just balance and coordination, but also in terms of like, if she's got the strength to do all those things, she's going to keep some stress going through the bones, some activation going through the bones. And those muscles are going to be supporting those joints.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Anyway,
exactly.
So those are questions I have.
Well, that was the other thing I wanted to bring up here. They say there's certain motions that you shouldn't ever do. Rotation, flexion, never do those again, sort of thing. And that's impossible because let's face it, we're going to bend over, we're going to twist. It's just natural. You open the refrigerator, you're doing some rotation. That's just life.
Right. Exactly.
So some of that is just there. But let's think of the muscles that are involved in a little bit of that rotation. Let's think of some of the muscles that are involved in just standing up out of a chair, about pushing, pulling. we're loading the spine. So the muscles that are attaching to the spine are getting activated. They're strengthening. If we're strengthening those muscles, aren't we actually pulling on the bones? Wouldn't that be increasing the bone density? Now, the bodies of the vertebrae don't have much attached to it. I get that. But the other areas, I'm thinking, wouldn't it make sense to want to train that? Yes, I want to train in weight bearing because I want the long bones to be stronger, but I want all the bones to be stronger.
Right. And like the two major areas you're concerned about is a hip fracture. If somebody gets a hip fracture, something like the likelihood of like dying within a year goes up like ridiculously high. So, that's just that, death, what do they call it? Morbidity and mortality goes up really a lot after a hip fracture. And then spinal fractures. Spinal fractures are awful. I had, one client who had 4 or 5 spinal fractures from osteoporosis that were stabilized with, they do kind of basically injections of glue kind of stuff. They kind of, they inject stuff into the vertebra to stabilize them. And she did great with that. And she was able to maintain her life and get out of pain, and life was grand. But that whole idea of, I need to keep working on the hips and the spine.
Yep.
And if you don't move the spine, you don't stimulate the muscles around the spine.
Yep.
So a lot of my thinking has always been, okay, how do I load the spine in beneficial ways? Right. In the most beneficial ways. And yes, extension is like, do 1 million back extensions is always kind of what everybody says to do for osteoporosis, at least in the spine. That's great. But
provided it's not contraindicated for you.
Right. Exactly. Which, it might be, but generally that's kind of the general thing is do extension, because that's going to use those back muscles and those spinal muscles. But a lot of those spinal muscles respond better to rotation. So I do, for example, a standing rotation where it's minimally loaded, right? I'm not leaning over and then rotating. So I've got gravity going on. I'm standing up and just rotating my spine like you do when you walk. Like you think about a speed walk, right? That's loaded rotation of the spine, but not terribly loaded, not strongly loaded. So that's something like I think about. It's like, how do I load the spine? I mean, maybe even a side plank is a nice way to load the spine, right? Front plank, side plank, back plank, going through those different areas. The other thing, well, anyway, that's it for now. You chat for a moment.
No. One thing I wanted to bring up, I completely agree. You need to be able to load the spine in as many ways as possible. And I am a huge proponent of all of the indirect ways. I call it indirect core work. Yeah. Where I'm doing single arm rows or presses, where I'm loading from various angles with tubes or bands or whatever, because I can offset and have it come from just one side. So now my core is active in a different way. So I'm almost doing a derotation. I'm not increasing the amount of rotation. I'm actually holding that. So I may have them do something like that, or with a suspension trainer doing a plank of some sort, with a marching or whatever. There's so many different ways that we can do that. But basically adding in the derotation aspect of it, where I'm going to just have them hold it, statue work basically, but do it with a band or a tube, because I can teach that for home. And that's a great way to get the musculature firing, especially the spinal musculature. One of my favorites, because most people need the upper back to be stronger, is to do sort of a rear deltoid exercise where I'll take a band and attach it to something, wall or something, and I'll face sideways to it. And with the arm that's away from it, I'll have it straight out in front of me and take it out to the side. And what I like about
a straight horizontal abduction with resistance,
absolutely,
right? Facing sideways. Yeah, I'm just trying to clarify that. Yep.
And because I'm facing sideways, as I take it out to the side, it's trying to twist me in. So I'm getting the entire posterior oblique sling firing. And sometimes I'll even take the leg closest to the anchor point and take it back a little bit so that glute can really be an anchor, and maybe add just a little bit of rotation at the very end, just a small amount. I stay in fairly an extended positions because I'm standing straight up, but it's a great way to get my posterior shoulder girdle firing, get the posterior oblique firing, but also because I'm fighting with that rotation, my core is lit up like crazy. And it's just an easy way that I can do it.
Yeah. So that whole idea of derotation is a funny concept. I just want to illuminate that a little bit more in case you're not familiar with that concept. I mean, the idea there is that if you are trying to keep your body from rotating, right?
Yep.
That will activate the core and activate it in a relatively neutral way. So that was a great example, Brian, of that.
And
And yeah.
an easy way to do it with your clients, even if you just want to experiment, is just have them sitting in a chair or standing up and have them take their arms straight out in front of you. For people watching on YouTube, straight out,
Yeah,
and
arms out in front.
yeah, and you
Yeah.
just apply some pressure on their hands. And again, you don't have to put much. As soon as you push a little bit, their
It's just
core
such a
begins
long
to
lever. It's like, ooh, ooh, ooh.
exactly.
Yeah.
So you put a pound or two, up to 5 pounds of pressure, and suddenly you're going to feel them shaking a little bit. Their core is active. And that's an easy way to start with that. And there's so many different ways: bands, tubing, all of that sort of things, even cables, springs. There's many different ways that you can do it. I love doing it on the reformer, facing sideways in a kneeling position, but you can also do it on the sitting box, and you can load that laterally as well. And, use a light band. You don't need, or a light spring. You don't need to use something too heavy, because that's a lot of torque that's going to be occurring on the spine. And let's face it, we're talking about clients who are going to be somewhat older anyway. Normally, they're going to be oftentimes in their 50s, 60s or above. So they don't need a lot of resistance.
Right. And we're just trying to get the core to fire. And another thing. So that's, any of those are awesome. And I love the statue work that you do. You introduced me to that, and I really find it incredibly useful. Creating that perturbation, to use one of Valentine's favorite words. One other thing that I'll do is, either with a suspension trainer or on the trap table with just the springs, is just levering yourself forward, leaning into the springs or the suspension trainer and tilting forward, or holding them in the other direction and tilting back, or holding on one and tilting side. Like, just taking your torso in one long line out of gravity is also another way just to get that core to fire. And then you add all kinds of complexity to that. You take the other arm up, you take the arm and make a rotational stress to it. So there's all kinds of things where you're basically not moving the spine, but you're activating the core indirectly, which is fabulous, right? That's fabulous for anybody with osteoporosis or osteopenia, and really a lot of your clients anyway.
Something else that I will do for these clients, one of the biggest contraindications, and we're going to talk about this now, maybe a good time, is they say avoid flexion. We need to avoid
loaded
flexion. Yes. So unloaded is not a big deal, but things like crunches, that's a lot of load, especially for someone. And what we were talking about before we started recording is, you take the two of us. You're a fairly tall woman, but you're lean. I'm 6 foot tall, nearly 200 pounds, but so we're similar-ish height, but we weigh a whole lot different.
And totally different mechanics in terms of
different mechanics.
You're lifting a whole lot more weight in your curl than I am, just as a simple one.
Exactly.
Right?
In a curl,
your shoulders are probably twice
different.
as big as mine. Yeah.
Exactly. So again, what is a weighted curl in that sense? And yes, everybody's body is different, and we can only use the body that we have with us.
Right.
So keep that in mind, that yes, crunches are probably out, but can we still load the spine in a way that's going to be beneficial, that does the same thing? My favorite, I call this my no flex crunches. I do this on the trap table Cadillac, where I'll use the bar with some springs, and I'll have it. So I'm pulling down, I'm supine, and I'll be pulling down, and I'll have the resistance be right in front of my chest. And then I can push the bar down toward my thighs and then back up. And just by adding that, because my arms are fairly long, it's a long lever, my core is engaging like crazy. And it's an easy way that I can still feel like I'm doing a crunch, but I'm not. I can hold halfway and do a march, or do march ups or whatever. And so I'm going to get the lower as well as the upper. It's a great way to add in something that would stimulate some of the same musculature, but you're not necessarily needing to flex and do that forward flexion. So it's just another option.
Yeah, I like that. Another way that I'll work with that is similar, but basically, instead of doing a roll down, you just do a lean back.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So holding on to the handles or the straps on the trap table or on the reformer and just holding on and then leaning back. The challenge with that is most clients are going to want to extend more than maybe you want them to or flex. So a lot of times what I'll do is I'll take like just a dowel and have it line up from their
Mm,
sacrum, the middle of their thorax, and their head. So they've got to keep all those three body parts on that dowel. I'm
nice.
holding it as we go,
Yep.
kind of anchoring the bottom piece. And they've got to keep all that together as they open up and come back.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's a flat back abdominal. We do them in the short box, we do them in many places. Training people to do that is hard for clients,
Mm-hmm.
but once they get it, it's a really nice way to get that full torso control going. And you can often, add other kinds of perturbations to it.
Yeah, something that I want you to think about the things that we just talked about for a second. Everything that we've discussed pretty much has been in a static position for the trunk.
Right.
It's been
Relatively
in a
neutral, static position. Yeah.
relatively neutral, static position. And we're either fighting against gravity, fighting against a resistance from a torque, a rotational, or a flexion or extension. But we're doing kind of a plank in multiple positions. And
Right.
this is a lot of times how I will work with these clients when we're doing things like a squat, a step up, a side step. All of these things is just getting them to think about where their spine is in space. I'm not going to get them, don't move your spine. No, just be aware, getting that awareness of where your spine is. Are you flexing? Are you extending? Are you leaning? I mean, it's the same thing we do when we teach a squat is you're looking, are they leaning from side to side? Are they leaning forward and back? We're still going to remind them of where they need to be. But I really just want their bodies to understand here's sort of your safety zone-ish sort of thing where the doctor really wants you to stay in. But at the same time, and this is one of those controversies, and I'm going to step in it right now. I'm getting ready to step in it.
Here we go.
I still believe you got to work through other ranges of motion. I do believe you should do some rotation. You should do some flexion because try and get out of bed without doing any flexion. Try and get out of a car or off the toilet without flexing your spine. You can't do it.
Exactly.
Now, do I want to put a lot of load? No. But do I still want them to be able to have the ability to work their body through these ranges of motion? I had a physical therapist who was the first to clue me into this because this is 20 some years ago. She was working in my facility and I was working with someone and we were keeping them very still at that time. And she said, why are you teaching him to be a robot? And I never thought about it because that's what I was told to do.
Right.
I said, look,
right. Me too.
Can they put on their shoes without bending over?
Exactly. Exactly. That's my classic. Put on shoes and socks without flexing. If you are really, really, really loose in your hips, which most older people
are not.
it's not possible. And even rolling over, like, am I going to lie in bed and then decide, okay, I have to roll to my right? Like, you don't do
as
that.
a unit.
Right. You roll your torso and then you're like, what's what you're going to do. And you're going to be asleep. So you're not going to think about it.
Exactly.
My other classic one is either picking up, if you are an older person with grandchildren or great nieces and nephews, like picking up squirming 2-year-olds. That is the dynamic load, right? Like that's a dynamic load. And being able to manage that is really important functionally.
Yep.
So yeah, how do we get those ranges of motion working without overworking or causing trouble? And that gets to one other piece. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's where the controversy comes from.
Yeah, exactly.
Because if we do that with a client and they get hurt, well, really, we're not following the orders from the protocol, the standard protocol. But at the same time, I need to make sure that they can live their life and that they can do what they want to do. Do I have them doing a ton of, bicycles, and really cross crunching and all that? Heck no.
Or short spine or something? No.
Exactly.
Right. Not going to happen. Not a good idea.
Not a good idea. But am I still going to get them to be able to work their body and move in a comfortable way where they might have a little bit of rotation? If I'm having them do a row, for instance, a one-arm row, I may say, just allow your shoulders to turn with comfort. And that's usually what I'll say. And some people just stay nice and still. I say, no problem. And sometimes I'll say, loosen up. And when they loosen up, they'll get just a couple of degrees of rotation. I'll say, that's fine. again, I just want them to experience a little bit more of that natural amount of normal rotation. When they're walking, swing your arms a little bit more, get a little bit of
Yeah.
that gentle
Yeah.
rotation going. It's not loaded, it's just their
Right.
body,
Yeah.
but it's something that I can still remind them, hey, you're not a robot. You can move. We just have to be careful about how we move, at least while we're training. Because I also think it comes down to repetitive stress sometimes. You
Yeah,
know,
absolutely.
because if I have to sit up out of a bed, I'm just doing one sit up.
Right. Right.
How
Yeah.
many of
Yeah.
our
Yeah.
clients do 10 of them before they get out of bed? Nobody.
Not many.
But you got to do one, getting off the throne. You got to do one. So guess what? It's okay to do one oftentimes, but if you do 50 crunches, that's probably going to be the repetitive stress is going to be way too much and it's loaded and all of that. So I'll watch that as well and just make sure that they're comfortable in the ranges of motion that they are able to do.
Which gets to this other idea a little bit, which is people, let's take loaded flexion, right? Let's just take a
Mhm.
curl or a crunch or a roll down, supported or unsupported, right? All those basic exercises. Clearly they're loaded flexion.
Mhm.
But I also know from training, a million clients for a million years, like clients can do that with support from their core and from the musculature around the spine or not.
Mhm.
Right. I think about a client who's holding onto the bar or holding onto the straps and doing a roll down. And the first thing you see is thoracic flexion. They just collapse into
Mhm.
thoracic flexion. There may not even be lumbar flexion. And then they kind of fall back and they come back up. And basically, if I was to palpate their spinal musculature at that moment, nothing would be happening.
I was gonna say there's no
Right.
musculature.
I would just be like, I would just be
Called
feeling the
gravity.
muscles squished. Right. Exactly. Whereas if I take somebody who has been really training that sense of axial elongation and core support and all that stuff, and they do the same exercise and they're rolling down, if I feel their spinal muscles, their erector spinae are going to be working, not 100%, it's not extension exercise, but they're going to be active.
Mhm.
And that means that their spine is supported in that exercise.
Yep.
So, this is, but you got a beginning client, you're working in a class. I'm thinking of like reformer classes with
Mm.
a whole bunch of people this age. Like, no, like you can't take that risk in a situation where
Yeah.
you can't actively palpate and control and understand how they are or aren't supporting that movement. Does that
I
make
think a
sense? It gets
lot.
into a lot of
Oh no.
detail, but that's kind of where the meat is.
And that's what I was just about to say is when it comes to something like this, the client, you have to take the client in front of you.
Yeah.
Because some clients, like the woman that I was talking about, the Latina who literally suddenly stopped moving, it took us about 6 weeks to get her to loosen up again.
Yeah.
And eventually she was like, oh, I can do this. It's like, yes, you can move again. It's okay. And got her into moving more gently and normal ranges of motion. Again, didn't have to load it, but wanted her to work ranges of motion. You got to know the client in front of you, because some of them, if I sent her to a reformer class, for instance, and she just was going to do everything that they wanted them
Yeah.
to do,
Yeah.
no,
Yeah.
that probably
Not
wouldn't
unless
work.
you really knew that instructor and knew that they're osteoporosis sensitive or knew what they were doing, which doesn't always
Exactly.
happen.
So for us, we're able to work one-on-one so we can keep some of these ideas and also
Yeah.
watch the client. Where are they today? What else is going on in their body? Did they come in with lots of energy? What, are they exhausted? There's a lot of other factors that can sometimes go into this that we can take into account and say, you know what, I'm going to take it a little easier today, or I might push a little bit harder today. And you just know the client in front of you and you get to know who they are. And I think
Yeah.
that's very important to remember.
One thing too that I want to bring up is working with a number of people with osteoporosis and then seeing if their numbers changed from doing Pilates, right?
Mhm.
I had several clients who I was following over like a couple of year period with, who are osteoporotic, not osteopenic, osteoporotic. And they started with Pilates after the diagnosis. So it wasn't something their body was adapted to. And this is the important piece. One of them particularly was a runner. She would run 3 times a week, 3 to 5 miles, but had been doing that for about 15 years.
Mhm.
So her bones had accommodated to it and were still osteoporotic. She also was on medications for some other issues, steroids and
Mhm.
things, which really screw up and
Yep.
thyroid stuff, all of which really screw up bone density. So she was high risk for all of that. And we started out with just a basic reformer program. We really didn't do anything fancy. We did footwork, we did feet and straps, we did some arm work, we did some different things, but we were loading her body in ways it had not been loaded before. Like, she was a runner, so she was very sagittal. So we did a lot of turned out work with her hips and a lot of, knee stretch and things where she's putting some load through that body. And then also things like all fours. We did a lot of all fours work. So she's bearing weight up into her shoulder. And what was interesting about that was her numbers got very much better after 6 months.
Yeah.
We weren't doing anything particular except for loading her body in a new way. So which forced her bones to respond in a new way. So that's the other thing. If you've got a client, like I'm thinking of your client you're talking about, Brian, who's been doing very active at these same things for a period of time, sometimes you just got to say, okay, let's just shake this up. Let's have you do different things.
Yep.
I've also heard, again, this is anecdotal, but from a number of my gyrotonic teachers, and if any of you know gyrotonic is a lot of rotation and a lot of
flexion.
Right? I mean, you just think about, so there's a lot going there, but they also were having really good results with people's numbers improving. And in that case, it's because they are genuinely stimulating the spine a lot in that movement. And some of it is really supported because you are, you're holding on to something and you're moving in those positions, but maybe that's a different kind of load. Like, I don't even know, because there isn't a lot of study about how that works, but it was interesting. So the second thing is you have to do new things, right? Whatever you've been doing that got you to where you are with osteoporosis, you have to stimulate the bones in different ways, whatever that is for you.
Something that I wanted to make mention before we finish up, if you don't see that your client is making improvements, if their DEXA scan is getting worse or it's not improving, something that has been proven in many studies is there are 3 things that you want to take a look at to improve osteoporosis. Weight-bearing exercise is one. Okay. Hormone replacements for some people.
Yeah.
Okay. And calcium, vitamin D.
Yeah. Nutrition.
Oftentimes, and nutrition. Oftentimes you need a combination. So people who I remember way back in the 90s, everybody was taking tons and tons and tons of calcium because it was, oh my gosh, you need to do this, but they didn't do anything else. Well, guess what? Their numbers didn't change a lot because they didn't do any exercise. Other clients only went on hormone replacements. Well, maybe it didn't change as well. Only did weight-bearing exercise. They didn't improve as much as they thought they should. So sometimes you need all 3, or you need a couple, maybe just 2.
Yeah, combination.
Everybody's different. But a combination. So if all they're doing is weight-bearing exercise and they don't want to go on the meds, they really don't, maybe have them talk to a nutritionist, maybe have them talk to their doctor about getting increased vitamin D, or at least getting tested for it to see where their numbers are and where their calcium is.
Yep.
And maybe if they're really not seeing any results on those 2, maybe it's time to talk about medications. And again, that's beyond our scope of practice, but at least we can have the conversation with them that, look, we're doing what we can. Maybe it's time for you to talk to the doctor and see what they would recommend on that end, because there are a lot more medications now than there were for fighting osteoporosis. But I do know that hormone replacement is one that just seems to work for some people. As soon as they get on it, suddenly their body begins to change. And on top of that, weight bearing, and on top of that, calcium, the trifecta seems to work wonders. And I've had a number of people go from being osteoporotic into osteopenia. You can see a sharp increase of the bone mass. So it does work.
Right. So this is, again, multimodal, right? This is us, but sometimes there's a big nutritional component. One thing that, this is a little random, so I'm going to finish up with that, but carbonated beverages, phosphoric acid tends to leach calcium. So when I think about kids who are drinking carbonated beverages, it just isn't so good. So there's other kinds of things just to think about in terms of nutrition. You know, if you've got a serious soda binger, you might want to just say, hey, can you stop doing that? Because there's little things like that that can help.
Yeah.
So we've talked about a lot. We've actually opened up a lot of the controversies that we find and the challenges we have as trainers trying to figure out, okay, I want to get them to be able to, deal with life and move in the ways they need to for life, but I've got to be careful about how I do that so I don't cause a fracture.
Yep.
So all of those pieces. Hopefully this has been stimulating. I think we're probably going to do another one on this, I assume, because this was opening up a can of worms. Now we got to talk about those worms.
Exactly. I was going to say, I think it would require a second episode where we can talk about specifics when it comes to exercise prescription. What do we do? What can we do? Because there's some other things that we didn't really talk about, which like shocking the bone, where we have that shock, that impact. And that's really an important fact to put in here. And I think that would be a good thing for us to discuss, as well as different types of weight bearing, and I think also how we might program differently if we had someone osteoporotic versus osteopenia, and where they are on the scale in the spectrum. So something to think about. So I think it warrants a secondary episode where we can go in. We'd love to hear from you though, if you have any suggestions or ideas and what you're doing with your clients when it comes to osteoporosis, because look, there's no hard and fast rules, unfortunately, when it comes to exercise, except for what the doctor will say is weight bearing. There's a lot to it. And here's what not to do.
No loaded flexion. Right. Yeah. Exactly.
And don't move in this way and do weight bearing. So we have to sort of interpret that and figure out what we can do to help these people. So I'd love to hear from you and let us know what you do in this situation, because, we're all ears. So hit us up at movingconvos@gmail.com is the best way to get in touch with us. And that way, we can share what we've learned. Also, you can always comment through Facebook, which is Moving Conversations, or Instagram, which we're a little bit more active with, or DM us through Instagram. Moving Convos is the best way to get in touch with us there as well. And do us a favor, hit that like and subscribe button, comment. We really appreciate it for all of our episodes on the platform of your choice. Thank you guys for listening. We really appreciate it. We appreciate every single listener. I'm sure we don't say that enough, but we do appreciate every single one of you. So for Nora St. John, I'm Brian Ritchie. We'll see you next time.
Bye, guys.